Shadows of the Throne. Chapter 1, A Chance Encounter. The bustling streets of Chang'an were alive with the vibrant energy of the Tang dynasty's golden age. Lady Mei, her silk robes rustling softly as she walked, navigated the crowded marketplace with practiced grace. Her dark eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the colorful stalls and boisterous vendors, searching for the rare herbs her ailing father needed. As the daughter of a prominent noble family, Mei was accustomed to the finer things in life. Yet, she found an inexplicable thrill in these excursions to the heart of the city, away from the suffocating propriety of the imperial court. Here, amidst the cacophony of daily life, she could breathe freely, if only for a moment. Lost in thought, Mei didn't notice the man until she collided with him. Strong hands steadied her, preventing an undignified tumble onto the dusty street. "My apologies, my lady," a deep voice rumbled. "I wasn't watching where I was going." Mei looked up, ready to dismiss the clumsy stranger with a polite nod, but the words died on her lips. The man before her was striking tall and broad-shouldered, with features that spoke of noble birth despite his simple attire. His eyes, a startling shade of amber, seemed to pierce right through her. "No harm done," Mei managed to say, regaining her composure. "I'm afraid I was equally distracted." The stranger's lips quirked into a half-smile. "Then we're both at fault." "I'm Jian." "Mei," she replied, surprised by her willingness to offer her name to this enigmatic man. A commotion near one of the nearby stalls drew their attention. Two men, their faces partially obscured by wide-brimmed hats, were engaged in a heated discussion. Their voices were low, but the tension in their postures was unmistakable. Curiosity piqued, Mei edged closer, Jian following suit. As they neared, fragments of the conversation became audible. "The emperor must not, time is running out. The sun, he could ruin everything." Mei's eyes widened, her heart racing. Were these men discussing what she thought they were? A glance at Jian confirmed he had heard it too, his expression grave. Before they could hear more, one of the men spotted them and nudged his companion. In an instant, both disappeared into the crowd, leaving Mei and Jian staring at the empty space they had occupied. "Did you hear that?" Mei whispered, her mind whirling with possibilities. Jian nodded, his amber eyes scanning the crowd. "I did. It seems we've stumbled upon something we weren't meant to hear." A chill ran down Mei's spine. What had they accidentally uncovered? And why did she have the feeling that her chance encounter with this mysterious Jian was about to change everything? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the marketplace, Mei knew one thing for certain: her life was about to become far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 2, Secrets Unveiled. The following evening found Mei pacing the moonlit garden of her family's estate, her mind still reeling from the events in the marketplace. The overheard conversation played on repeat in her thoughts, each word laden with potential danger. A rustle in the nearby foliage made her freeze. Mei's hand instinctively went to the small dagger hidden in the folds of her robe, a precaution her father had insisted upon. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. From the shadows emerged a familiar figure. Jian stepped into the pale moonlight, his presence both a relief and a new source of tension. "How did you find me?" Mei demanded, not lowering her guard. Jian raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I apologize for the intrusion, Lady Mei. But after yesterday's events, I felt it imperative we speak in private." Mei studied him, noting the fine quality of his clothes, a stark contrast to his attire in the marketplace. "You're not just a simple citizen, are you, Jian?" A rueful smile played on his lips. "No, I'm not. And I suspect you've already guessed that." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I am the emperor's son. His illegitimate son." The revelation, though not entirely unexpected, still sent a jolt through Mei. She had heard whispers of the emperor's indiscretions, but to be face to face with living proof was another matter entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her mind racing with the implications. "Because I believe the conversation we overheard concerns a plot against my father against the throne," Jian replied, his voice low and urgent. "And I need your help to uncover it?" Mei's eyebrows shot up. "My help? Why would you trust me with something so dangerous?" Jian's amber eyes met hers, his gaze intense. "Because you were there. Because you heard what I heard. And because I've made inquiries, your family's reputation for loyalty to the throne is unimpeachable." Mei felt a mix of pride and trepidation at his words. "Even if what you say is true, this is far beyond anything I've ever dealt with. We could be risking our lives." "I know," Jian acknowledged. "But if we don't act, the consequences could be catastrophic. Not just for my father, but for the entire empire." A heavy silence fell between them as Mei weighed her options. The sensible choice would be to politely decline, to retreat to the safety of her privileged life. But the memory of those whispered words in the marketplace gnawed at her. If there truly was a threat to the throne, could she live with herself knowing she had done nothing? "If I agree to help," Mei said slowly, "we do this my way. No rash actions, no unnecessary risks. We gather information carefully and methodically." Relief washed over Jian's face. "Agreed. Your caution may well keep us alive." As they began to discuss their next steps, Mei couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a path from which there was no turning back. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the momentous decision that had just been made. In the distance, a nightingale began to sing, its melody a stark contrast to the weighty conversation taking place beneath the moon's watchful gaze. Mei and Jian, an unlikely pair bound by secrets and shared purpose, stood at the precipice of a journey that would test their wits, their courage, and perhaps even their hearts. Chapter 3, Palace Intrigue. The imperial palace loomed before Mei, its golden roofs gleaming in the morning sun. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves as she prepared to enter a world of silk-draped deception and whispered conspiracies. As the daughter of a high-ranking noble, Mei was no stranger to court life. But today, her usual social calls and polite conversations would serve as a cover for a far more dangerous mission. Remember, Jian had told her the night before, trust no one completely. Keep your eyes and ears open, but don't draw attention to yourself. Mei nodded to the guards at the gate, her face a mask of serene indifference. Inside, the palace bustled with activity. Courtiers in elaborate robes hurried along corridors, servants scurried about their tasks, and the air hummed with 1,000 whispered conversations. Making her way to the ladies' quarters, Mei greeted acquaintances with practiced ease. She settled into a group of noblewomen, their chatter a soothing background as she attuned her senses to any hint of useful information. "Did you hear?" one lady whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "The Minister of War was seen arguing with the Emperor's chief advisor yesterday." Mei's ears pricked up, but she kept her face neutral. "Oh? How unusual," she murmured, encouraging more. "Indeed," another woman chimed in. "And I've heard rumors of secret meetings happening in the eastern wing of the palace." As the morning wore on, Mei carefully catalogued every snippet of gossip, every meaningful glance between courtiers. She noticed the Minister of War, his face drawn and worried, hurrying down a hallway with a scroll clutched tightly in his hand. During a lull in the conversations, Mei excused herself, ostensibly to powder her nose. Instead, she made her way towards the eastern wing, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. As she rounded a corner, she nearly collided with a figure emerging from a hidden door. Mei's breath caught in her throat as she recognized one of the men from the marketplace. The man's eyes widened in recognition, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a curt nod, he hurried past her, disappearing into the labyrinth of the palace. Mei's mind raced. She had confirmed the conspirators' presence in the palace, But at what cost? Had she just blown her cover? As she made her way back to the ladies' quarters, Mei's thoughts turned to Jian. He was navigating his own treacherous path through the male-dominated areas of the court. She could only hope he was having more success and less close calls. The day wore on, a delicate dance of information gathering and misdirection. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, Mei prepared to leave. She had gathered a wealth of information, but the true challenge would be piecing it all together. Just as she was about to exit the palace gates, a hand grasped her arm. Mei turned, coming face to face with Jian. His expression was grim. "We need to talk," he said in a low voice. "Now." As they slipped away into the gathering dusk, Mei knew that their investigation had just taken a dangerous turn. The game of secrets and lies was escalating, and they were caught right in the middle of it. Chapter 4, A Dangerous Alliance. The flickering light of a single lantern cast long shadows across the walls of the abandoned temple where Mei and Jian had taken refuge. The musty scent of age-old incense lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the urgency of their meeting. "What happened?" Mei asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You looked troubled at the palace gates." Jian ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure slipping. "I overheard a conversation between the Minister of War and a man I didn't recognize. They mentioned a final phase and something about eliminating obstacles." Mei's breath caught in her throat. "That aligns with what I discovered. There's definitely a plot brewing in the eastern wing of the palace." As they shared their findings, a clearer picture began to emerge. A network of conspirators, reaching to the highest levels of the imperial court, was planning something big. But the details remained frustratingly elusive. "We need more concrete evidence," Jian said, pacing the small space. "Rumors and overheard conversations won't be enough to convince my father." Mei nodded, her mind racing. "There's a grand banquet in 3 days' time. All the high-ranking officials will be there. It could be our chance to gather more information." Jian's eyes lit up. Or it could be the conspirators' chance to strike. As they formulated their plan for the banquet, neither noticed the shadow that briefly passed across the temple's small window. Suddenly, the air was filled with the whistle of an arrow. Jian reacted instinctively, pulling Mei to the ground as the projectile embedded itself in the wall where her head had been moments before. "We've been discovered," Jian hissed, drawing a concealed sword from his robes. Mei's heart pounded as she retrieved her own dagger. The sounds of approaching footsteps echoed outside. "There's a hidden passage behind the altar," she whispered, recalling childhood stories about the old temple. "If we can reach it?" Jian nodded, understanding. As the temple door burst open, he charged forward, his blade clashing with the assassin's. Mei used the distraction to make a dash for the altar, her fingers frantically searching for the hidden mechanism. The fight behind her was a blur of motion and the ring of steel on steel. Just as she felt the altar shift, revealing a dark passage, Mei heard Jian cry out in pain. Without thinking, she turned back. Jian was on one knee, blood seeping from a gash in his side. The assassin loomed over him, blade raised for a killing blow. In that moment, Mei acted on pure instinct. Her dagger flew through the air, finding its mark in the assassin's shoulder. The man stumbled back with a howl of pain, giving Jian the opening he needed to deliver a knockout blow. "Come on!" Mei cried, helping Jian to his feet. Together, they stumbled into the passage, the sound of more approaching footsteps spurring them on. As the hidden door slid shut behind them, plunging them into darkness, Mei realized two things with startling clarity. First, their investigation had just become far more dangerous than they had anticipated. And second, the connection between her and Jian had deepened into something she couldn't yet define, but knew she couldn't ignore. Supporting each other, they made their way through the pitch-black tunnel, their hearts racing in tandem. The plot against the throne was real, and deadly. Now, more than ever, they would need to rely on each other if they hoped to survive and uncover the truth. Chapter 5, Unraveling the Past. The safe house was a modest dwelling on the outskirts of the city, its unremarkable exterior belying its importance. Inside, Mei tended to Jian's wound, her fingers working deftly to clean and bandage the gash on his side. "You're surprisingly skilled at this," Jian remarked, wincing slightly as she applied a healing salve. Mei's lips curved into a small smile. "My mother insisted I learn. She always said a noble lady should be prepared for anything." As she worked, the air between them grew thick with unspoken words and lingering glances. The shared danger of the previous night had forged a bond neither had anticipated. "Thank you," Jian said softly, his hand briefly covering hers. "For saving my life." Mei felt a warmth spread through her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. They had more pressing matters to address. "Jian," she began, her voice serious, "I think it's time you told me everything. About your past, your relationship with the Emperor, all of it?" He nodded, his amber eyes clouding with memories. "You're right. It's a complicated tale, but one you need to hear." Over the next hour, Jian recounted his story. He spoke of his mother, a palace maid who had caught the Emperor's eye, of growing up in secret, trained in the arts of war and statecraft but never acknowledged publicly. He described the complex dance of court politics, where he was both an asset and a potential threat to the throne. "And now," he concluded, "someone is using my very existence as a weapon against my father." Mei listened intently, her mind piecing together the fragments of the conspiracy. "The whispers we heard in the marketplace, they must see you as a threat to their plans." Jian nodded grimly. "Or as a potential puppet. If they can't overthrow my father directly, installing me as a controllable alternative might be their backup plan." As they discussed the implications, Mei found her thoughts drifting to her own family history. "You know," she said slowly, "my ancestors weren't always nobles. There are stories, passed down through generations, of a great service one of my forebears performed for the imperial family." Jian leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of service?" "The details are vague, but it involved uncovering a plot against the throne. As a reward, our family was elevated to noble status." Mei's eyes widened as a realization struck her. "Jian, what if that ancient conspiracy is connected to what's happening now?" Excitement flashed in Jian's eyes. "It's possible. Many of these noble families have centuries-old grudges and ambitions. We need to look into this." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Both tensed, reaching for their weapons, but relaxed when they heard a familiar voice. "It's me," called Jian's most trusted servant, Linear. "I brought the items you requested, young master." As Lin entered, bearing scrolls and documents, Mei and Jian exchanged determined looks. They had a new lead to follow, one that might take them deep into the annals of imperial history. For the rest of the day, they pored over ancient records and family histories, searching for the thread that might connect past and present. As night fell, Mei found herself stealing glances at Jian, marveling at his intensity and intelligence. She couldn't help but wonder what might have been if they had met under different circumstances. But such thoughts were a luxury they couldn't afford. With each passing hour, the danger grew. Somewhere in the sprawling imperial palace, their enemies were moving forward with their plans. And Mei and Jian knew that they were now in a race against time to uncover the truth and save the throne and possibly the entire empire. Chapter 6, Betrayal in the Ranks. The grand banquet hall of the imperial palace glittered with 1,000 lanterns, their light reflecting off the jewels and silks of the assembled nobility. Mei moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her elaborate hairstyle and richly embroidered gown allowing her to blend seamlessly with the other courtiers. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the positions of key players they had identified in their investigation. The Minister of War stood near a pillar, deep in conversation with a group of military officials. Across the room, the emperor's chief advisor laughed loudly at some joke, his eyes darting furtively around the hall. Jian was there too, though few knew his true identity. He played the part of a minor noble, circulating through the crowd and gathering snippets of conversation. Their eyes met briefly across the room, a silent communication passing between them. As the night wore on, Mei found herself approached by Lin, Jian's trusted servant. "My lady," he murmured, bowing low, "the young master requests your presence in the East Garden. He says it's urgent." Alarm bells rang in Mei's mind. This wasn't part of their plan. But she nodded graciously, making her way towards the garden with measured steps, her hand brushing the hidden dagger in her sleeve. The East Garden was eerily quiet, the sounds of the banquet muffled by the thick foliage. Mei's senses were on high alert as she rounded a corner, expecting to see Jian. Instead, she came face to face with the Minister of War and two armed guards. "Lady Mei," the minister said, his voice cold. "I'm afraid your little investigation ends here." Mei's mind raced. How had they been discovered? And where was Jian? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Jian emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of regret. "I'm sorry, Mei. I had no choice." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. "Jian, what have you done?" "What I had to do to protect the empire," he replied, his voice strained. "They threatened my mother. I couldn't." Mei didn't wait to hear more. In one fluid motion, she drew her dagger and threw it at the nearest guard, using the moment of surprise to dash past them. She heard shouts behind her as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. The palace corridors became a maze as Mei fled, her mind whirling with the implications of Jian's betrayal. Had it all been a lie? Every shared moment, every secret uncovered? She rounded a corner and found herself in a dead end. As she turned to backtrack, she came face to face with Jian, his sword drawn. "Mei, please," he pleaded, "let me explain." "Explain what?" she spat, backing away. "How you used me. How you betrayed everything we worked for." "It's not what you think," Jian insisted, taking a step forward. "I had to make them believe I was on their side. It was the only way to get close enough to uncover the full extent of the plot." Mei hesitated, wanting desperately to believe him. But the sound of approaching guards forced her hand. She had to make a decision. In that moment, as their eyes met, Mei saw the truth in Jian's gaze. The anguish, the determination, the silent plea for trust. Making a split-second decision, she nodded. Jian moved swiftly, pulling her into an alcove hidden behind a tapestry just as the guards rushed past. In the cramped space, they stood pressed together, barely daring to breathe. "I'm sorry," Jian whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "I should have found a way to warn you." Mei's anger melted away, replaced by a mix of relief and lingering uncertainty. "We'll discuss this later," she murmured back. "For now, what's our next move?" As the sounds of the search faded, Jian outlined his plan. The conspirators, believing him to be on their side, had revealed crucial details. Now, with Mei's help, they had a chance to turn the tables. Together, they slipped out of their hiding place, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night was far from over, and the fate of the empire hung in the balance. But as they moved through the shadowy corridors, Mei felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever came next, she and Jian would face it together. Chapter 7, The Emperor's Test. The pre-dawn air was crisp as Mei and Jian made their way through the secret passages of the imperial palace. Their footsteps echoed softly off the stone walls, a rhythmic counterpoint to the pounding of their hearts. "Are you sure about this?" Mei whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows around them. Jian nodded grimly. "It's our only chance. If we can get to my father before the conspirators make their move, we might be able to turn this around." They emerged into a dimly lit corridor near the emperor's private chambers. The guards posted at the entrance tensed at their approach, hands moving to their weapons. "Halt," one called out. "Who goes there?" Jian stepped forward, his bearing regal despite his disheveled appearance. "I am Jian, son of the emperor. I must speak with my father immediately. It's a matter of utmost urgency." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. Jian's existence was a closely guarded secret, known to only a select few. Before they could decide, the chamber doors swung open, revealing the emperor himself. "Father," Jian said, dropping to one knee. Mei followed suit, her heart racing. The emperor's gaze was sharp, assessing. "Rise," he commanded. "Explain yourselves." Over the next hour, Mei and Jian laid out everything they had uncovered about the conspiracy. The emperor listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he spoke. "And you expect me to believe this tale? That my most trusted advisors are plotting against me, based on the word of my illegitimate son and a noblewoman?" Mei's heart sank. They had no concrete proof, only their word and the fragments of information they'd pieced together. But Jian stood tall. "Father, I know I have no right to ask for your trust. But I swear on my life that every word we've spoken is true. Test us, if you must. But please, act before it's too late." A tense silence fell over the room. Then, to Mei's surprise, the emperor's stern expression softened slightly. "Very well," he said. "You shall have your test. If what you say is true, the conspirators will make their move soon. We will set a trap, and you two will be instrumental in springing it." As the emperor outlined his plan, Mei felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They had a chance to prove themselves, but the stakes couldn't be higher. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Trusted guards were positioned strategically throughout the palace. Mei and Jian were given specific roles to play, each requiring them to put their lives on the line. As the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Mei found a moment alone with Jian. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly, searching his face. Jian took her hand, his touch sending a shiver through her. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything." Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them seemed to crystallize. But before either could speak, a commotion erupted in the distance. "It's starting," Jian said, his expression hardening. Mei squeezed his hand once before letting go. "Then let's finish this." Together, they hurried towards the sound of clashing steel and shouting voices. The final confrontation was upon them, and the fate of the empire hung in the balance. As they ran, Mei silently prayed that their trust in each other, and the emperor's tentative faith in them, would be enough to see them through the coming storm. Chapter 8, Race Against Time. The palace erupted into chaos as the conspirators made their move. Mei and Jian raced through the corridors, the sounds of clashing steel and shouting growing louder with each step. They burst into the main courtyard to find a scene of utter pandemonium. Loyal imperial guards battled against the rebels, while confused courtiers fled in all directions. In the center of it all stood the Minister of War, shouting orders to his co-conspirators. "There." Jian pointed towards a group of rebels making their way towards the emperor's chambers. "We have to stop them." Mei nodded, drawing her dagger. They sprinted across the courtyard, dodging stray arrows and clashing swords. As they reached the rebels, Jian engaged the leader in combat while Mei used her agility to outmaneuver the others. Her years of secret training paid off as she disarmed one attacker after another, her movements fluid and precise. Jian fought with the skill of a seasoned warrior, his sword flashing in the morning light. But even as they gained the upper hand, Mei spotted a figure slipping away from the main battle. It was the emperor's chief advisor, clutching a scroll and heading towards a hidden exit. "Jian," she called out, gesturing towards the fleeing figure. The advisor. Understanding flashed in Jian's eyes. Go. I'll hold them off here. Mei hesitated for a split second, torn between staying to help Jian and pursuing the advisor. But she knew the scroll could be crucial evidence. With a quick nod to Jian, she took off after the advisor. The chase led her through a maze of lesser-known palace passages. Mei's heart pounded as she slowly gained ground on the older man. Just as she was about to reach him, he ducked into a small chamber and slammed the door shut. Mei threw herself against the door, but it wouldn't budge. She could hear the advisor inside, his breathing labored. It's over, she called out. Surrender now, and you may yet receive mercy. A bitter laugh came from behind the door. Foolish girl. You have no idea what forces you're dealing with. This plot goes beyond the palace, beyond the empire itself. Mei's mind raced. What could he mean? Before she could press further, she heard a strange hissing sound from within the chamber, followed by a thud. With a surge of desperate strength, she managed to force the door open. The advisor lay on the floor, a vial of poison clutched in his lifeless hand. The scroll lay nearby, its seal broken. Mei snatched up the scroll, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. It detailed not just the plot against the emperor, but a vast conspiracy involving neighboring kingdoms and powerful merchant guilds. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her back to the present. She had to get this information to the emperor immediately. Racing back towards the main battle, Mei's thoughts turned to Jian. Had he managed to hold off the rebels? Was he safe? As she rounded the final corner, she collided with a figure. Strong arms steadied her, and she looked up into Jian's familiar ember eyes. Mei. Thank the heavens you're all right, he breathed, relief evident in his voice. The scroll, she gasped, holding it out. We need to get this to your father. It changes everything. Understanding the urgency, Jian nodded. Together, they sprinted towards the emperor's position, knowing that the fate of the empire rested in their hands. The battle was far from over, but with the truth finally coming to light, they had a fighting chance. As they ran, Mei felt a surge of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew that with Jian by her side, they could face anything. Chapter 9, Truth and Consequences. The imperial throne room, usually a place of quiet dignity, now echoed with the clamor of battle and urgent voices. Mei and Jian burst through the ornate doors, the precious scroll clutched tightly in Mei's hand. The emperor stood at the center of the room, surrounded by his loyal guards. His eyes widened at the sight of his son and the noblewoman, both disheveled and bearing the marks of recent combat. Father! Jian called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. We have the proof. As they approached, Mei unfurled the scroll, her hands shaking slightly. Your Majesty, this document details the full extent of the conspiracy. It's far larger than we imagined. The emperor's eyes scanned the contents, his expression growing grimmer with each line. Around them, the sounds of fighting began to die down as the loyal forces gained the upper hand. This is troubling, the emperor said at last, his voice heavy. It seems we face not just internal strife, but threats from beyond our borders as well. As the implications of the scroll's contents sank in, the doors burst open once more. The Minister of War was dragged in, bound and struggling, by a group of imperial guards. Traitor, the minister spat, his eyes wild with fury and desperation. You would believe the words of a bastard and a meddling girl over your trusted advisor. The emperor's gaze hardened. The evidence speaks for itself, minister. Your guilt is clear. As the guards took the minister away, Mei felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The adrenaline of the past hours began to fade, leaving her acutely aware of every bruise and ache. Jian stepped forward, his bearing regal despite his battered appearance. Father, what happens now? The emperor sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. Now, we must deal with the consequences of this plot. The court will be in turmoil. Our neighbors may see this as an opportunity to strike. And you, my son. He paused, his gaze softening slightly. Your role in uncovering this conspiracy cannot be ignored. Mei's heart raced. Would the emperor finally acknowledge Jian publicly? What would that mean for the succession, for the stability of the empire? Before the emperor could continue, a commotion arose outside the throne room. A group of noble families, led by Mei's father, entered. Your Majesty, Mei's father said, bowing low. We have heard of the plot against you. The noble houses stand ready to support the throne in this time of crisis. The emperor nodded gravely. Your loyalty is noted and appreciated. We will need every ally in the days to come. As discussions of the empire's future began in earnest, Mei found herself drifting to the sidelines. Her part in this grand drama seemed to be coming to an end, and she felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Jian appeared at her side, his hand finding hers. Are you all right? He asked softly. Mei nodded, managing a small smile. Just, overwhelmed. Everything's changing so fast. Indeed it is, Jian agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. But some things, I hope, will remain constant. The warmth in his gaze made Mei's heart skip a beat. But before she could respond, they were called back to the center of the room. The emperor had made a decision, and the future of the empire hung in the balance. As they stepped forward to hear the emperor's proclamation, Mei realized that while one chapter of their adventure was ending, another was just beginning. Whatever came next, she knew that her life and the life of the empire would never be the same. Chapter 10, A New Beginning. The soft glow of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold as Mei stood on the balcony overlooking the imperial gardens. A week had passed since the thwarting of the conspiracy, and the capital was still abuzz with the aftermath. The emperor's proclamation had sent shockwaves through the court. Jian was officially acknowledged as the emperor's son, granted a title and a position in the imperial hierarchy. The news had been met with a mix of surprise, skepticism, and in some quarters, barely concealed resentment. Mei sighed, her thoughts a whirlwind of recent events. Her own role in uncovering the plot had not gone unnoticed. Her family's status had been elevated, and whispers of a potential match with a high-ranking official had reached her ears. You're up early, a familiar voice said behind her. Mei turned to see Jian approaching, his new robes of office glinting in the early morning light. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. Too much on my mind. Jian nodded, coming to stand beside her. I know the feeling. Everything's changed so quickly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the palace come to life below them. I'm leaving, Mei said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. Jian's head snapped towards her, his eyes wide with surprise. Leaving? But why? Mei took a deep breath. The emperor has appointed me as an envoy to the neighboring kingdoms. With the threat of external forces involved in the conspiracy, he wants someone he can trust to assess the situation firsthand. I see, Jian said, his voice carefully neutral. When do you depart? In 3 days, Mei replied, finally meeting his gaze. The intensity she found there made her heart race. 3 days, Jian repeated softly. Then, with a sudden determination, he took her hand. Mei, I don't want you to go. Or rather, I don't want you to go without me. Mei's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying, Jian? I'm saying that these past weeks have shown me what truly matters. The throne, the titles, they mean nothing without you by my side. He paused, gathering his courage. I love you, Mei. And if you'll have me, I want to face whatever comes next together. Tears pricked at Mei's eyes as emotions overwhelmed her. Oh, Jian, she whispered. I love you too. but your place is here, helping your father stabilize the empire. Jian shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. My place is wherever you are. Besides, he added with a mischievous glint in his eye, who better to accompany an imperial envoy than a prince of the realm? Mei laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. You're impossible, you know that. Impossibly in love with you, Jian countered, pulling her close. As their lips met in a tender kiss, Mei felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and potential dangers. But with Jian by her side, she felt ready to face anything. The sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the imperial city. Below, the palace bustled with activity, nobles and servants alike preparing for another day of intrigue and politics. But up on the balcony, Mei and Jian remained lost in their own world, savoring the promise of their new beginning. As they finally parted, Mei's eyes sparkled with excitement. So, my prince, she said teasingly, are you ready for our next adventure? Jian's answering grin was radiant. With you? Always. Hand in hand, they turned to face the new day, their hearts full of love and their spirits buoyed by the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The conspiracy had been thwarted, the empire saved, but for Mei and Jian, the greatest journey of all was just beginning.